Hey y'all, welcome into the live. It's your girl Mercedes. Today we are talking about all things discrimination, misogynoir, retaliation, poor performance, all of the things that Black women face in kind of the worst elements of our job cycle, right? Or how we exist and show up in the workplace. So if you're new here, welcome in. Make sure that you say hello. But yeah, so I think a lot of the times when these types of things happen to us, whether that is like we're terminated, or we're maybe they're setting us up to be terminated, like we have a write-up, we have a performance improvement plan, or we just kind of have some general negative feedback that we don't quite think is fair or equitable. We feel like there's something else going on there. A lot of times our first thought is to kind of shrink, to say, if I just get a little bit smaller, if I just kind of step back from this, then it'll maybe go away. And the unfortunate part is that it often does not go away. It often leads to an increase in unfair and negative performance evaluations and reviews, particularly when we have leaders around us who are insecure, who are just poor leaders or triggered by us. We're going to talk about a lot of those things today. But I'm going to tell you today how to not shrink, how to fight the good fight, how to make sure that you are, respected and valued in that. Hey, Whelpington, what a name. I love that. But yeah, so that's all of what we're talking about today. So if you're here, either you're currently navigating this in the past or you've navigated that today, I want you to know that there are absolutely ways for you to be able to show up for yourself, navigate and advocate for yourself in a way that allows you to hopefully mitigate this and reduce this in the future. Now, I'm not here to say that these are going to resolve everything, that it might not lead to adverse outcomes in your career and things like that. We're going to talk about some of the risk in this as well. But that's what we're here to talk about today. So welcome in. I'm so glad that you all are here. If you're here, I can't see all of y'all. I see some of you on TikTok. I see some of you on YouTube. But basically just say, hey, Tabby, welcome in. But just say hello in the chat, right? So let me introduce myself while you're saying hello. So tell me where you are, tell me where you're listening in from, and we'll go from there. But my name is Mercedes Swan. I live in North Central Florida. I am the career love coach, and my entire goal in this life is to support Black women in their careers and their businesses. As an individual that has gone through and experienced toxic work environments, allowed that to really impact my mental health, like. It was a little rough, okay? My goal is Black women bliss. I want other Black women to learn and gain the skills necessary in order to succeed, whether that's in their career, their business, or building a lifestyle that really aligns with what they want to see. And so that's my whole goal here to do. So if you're here, let me know where you're from, where you're calling in from, and we will go from there. Okay. All right. So before we get started, I would really like to know. I always say, like, the clock out is something that I want to be. So the clock out, if you're new, if you're really, really new here, the clock out is my live stream that I do at 6 p.m. Sometimes I do it multiple times, whatever. Today, this week, we are talking again about discrimination and toxic work environments and how we can really stand up for ourselves in the workplace. So if you're here, just know I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear your questions, your thoughts, all of the things that you've got going on. Hey, purpose-minded woman, welcome into the live. But I really want to hear what you've got going on. And so please, I'm so happy to make this, take this wherever it may go. I see eyes. What are the eyes for? Say hello. What are the eyes for? Oh, I know you're here. Hey, you're not late. You're not late. I'm proud of you. Okay, so as we go through, my first question for you. So if you're here and you've sat in a job where you felt like you received, negative performance feedback, you were discriminated against, maybe that's a performance review or a write-up. What feedback was it that you received? You don't have to put all your business out there, but what was it? Was it about your performance? Was it about your communication? Was it about you not meeting expectations? Like, tell me what it was. Was it a PIP? Was it a performance review? I would love to kind of know. Not that I love that it happened, but it really does happen to a lot of us, like myself included. I'm going to tell a little bit of my story as we go through this, but yeah, it's rough out there in these streets. Okay, it's rough out there in these streets. Okay. All right, so we'll start off with a story. Hey, Marilyn, welcome into the live. But one of my first stories in my career where when I said at the beginning, like, don't shrink, this is kind of what my mom because she wasn't paid to shuffle paper. They're not paying you out there. Oh no. Okay, yeah. But yeah, so one of my first things that I learned to not shrink is because really if you've been to the workplace bully, you've been to the negative feedback, your supervisor. Your supervisor said that you were paid to shuffle paper. Oh, meaning like you provided some feedback and they said you weren't provided. You weren't meant to do that. You were meant to shuffle paper. That's wild. I believe it though. I believe that somebody said that to you. Whew, okay. We just out here struggling. Okay, so for me, here's what happened with me. So it's still early in my career. I was doing human resources. So a lot of you know, like I started my career off in human resources. I was doing generalist work. I was doing a lot of recruitment. And I had an individual that I felt like when I initially interacted with this person, they were very much about supporting my growth or development. They came from a similar background and had recently pivoted. And so it really, this person kind of positioned themselves. Oh, thank you so much for the gifts. But this person positioned themselves as somebody that I thought was going to be maybe a mentor, support, somebody else that I could kind of lean to and talk to, right? And up until that point, most of the HR professionals that I had interacted with were very supportive, provided great advice. Some of those HR professionals are still my mentors today. And so it was like, okay, I wasn't really prepared for this. I said early career, right? And so as I went on, I realized, I'll tell you why later, that this individual was really just trying to use that as a tool to kind of control people, right? So it's kind of like those people that like use they leverage a relationship. So if they're like, oh, well, we get along really well. You really like me. I'm putting on the charm, the Riz or whatever in the workplace, then you'll listen to me. Like you won't push back on what I say to do. You're just going to kind of go along with whatever I say. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that was that individual's tactic because he had used it on other people. Oh, we're going to gain favor. We're going to build a relationship. And then I'm just going to do whatever I want. And you're going to kind of go with it because we have this relationship. And so in that role, right, I was a recruiter, right? So I was hiring a lot of individuals that did not follow the recruitment process, often led to me having challenges in the recruitment process because if they didn't give me what I needed to recruit for them, then I couldn't help them, right? That's a lot of the two-way relationships that people just don't understand or see about human resources. And so I would have this individual trying to make decisions or do certain things in the recruitment process their own way, but they weren't responsible for that process anymore. They weren't in human resources anymore. Thank you so much for the gifts on TikTok. I appreciate you. It's not showing me all of them, but I just see it going up. So, thank you for the gifts. I appreciate you. Thank you. Oh, there it is. It's going a little bit slow. But all of that being said, I recognized over time that as I was pushing it back against this individual to say, hey, that's not how we do things. This is how we shouldn't do this or that. They got upset, right? It was very much an ego thing where they thought they were going to be able to do whatever they wanted. And since I was early career, I just think they thought I was going to listen to them, which is really unfortunate. Thanks for sharing the live too. But this is, super unfortunate. And so I ended up, when I was pushing back, there was a particular instance when I was pushing back, but I didn't necessarily elevate this as an issue that I was having with others. I was like, I have a relationship with this person. We're going to work things out. I can kind of trust this person even if we don't see eye to eye. Now, in the background, this person was kind of politically maneuvering around me, which I hadn't known at the time. But overall, there was this instance where this individual did something that really was going to harm employees, right? And if you know me, hey, Sam, welcome in. If you know me, my thing is that I really, really hate it when people in leadership try and take advantage of employees or do something that's going to harm them. And they just don't want to take responsibility for it, or they want to kind of minimize the challenges for that. And so he made a decision, wanted to do something, came to me, and I said, that's unethical. Y'all know me. I get so, hey, CJ, hey girl, hey, how are you? Welcome into the live. It's good to see you. But this supervisor came in and said, we're doing this. And I was like, that's unethical. Because y'all know how I get when I feel like people are trying to mistreat people in the workplace. And so I said that to that individual's face. It was also somebody else in the room. And I was like, well, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do that so that it's not a big issue. And so that situation, they were upset that I didn't allow them to do what they wanted to do, which I felt like wasn't good. They went and tattled on me, tattletales. How about y'all have a grown person's conversation to my face? But they tattled on me. Hey, vintage. They tattled on me, and I think it was like maybe the next day or something. My supervisor came to me and they were like, "Hey, you can't be calling people unethical. This isn't the way that we do things, blah, blah, blah." And in that situation, I was very much like, hey, you know what? I totally get you. I probably shouldn't call this person unethical. But in reality, a lot of the things the impact of that wasn't really an ethical decision. There was nepotism embedded in this. There was taking advantage of an individual who was younger. And also it was kind of in a way that this was done was excluding other candidates who are more qualified to basically hire an individual who had kind of a nepotism relationship who was not equipped to do the job, right? Hey, Six Figure Ambition, I love that name. Okay. And so what ended up happening, right, is that I ended up having that conversation. I said, hey, here's really what happened. I advised them about this. I said why this wasn't a good idea. They said they were going to go around me. They offered something to this candidate that they shouldn't have, XYZ reasons. I acknowledge that. I shouldn't have called them unethical, but in reality, this is a huge issue and a huge liability for the organization to do this. I'm not going to put all the business of why it was a big issue because it'll be telling of which employer I'm talking about. But yeah, this could have real implications on real people's lives had something gone wrong with this entire situation. So maybe I shouldn't have used the word unethical, but at the end of the day, like my decision was very much embedded in what was right and wrong in this situation. If you don't want to say it's unethical, you're triggered by that, then whatever. Okay, right? And so I found out later in this process, right? And so that was one of those things where originally in this conversation, I was not really setting really strong boundaries until there was a big value that this person had kind of interrupted or came up against that caused an issue, right? And so it wasn't until later where I wasn't really sticking up for myself with the other people around me. And I think that's what really caused a lot of issues, right? With the later interactions that I had with this individual where they thought they were going to kind of go to my supervisor and complain about things, and that was going to shift because that person ended up getting their way. And then it ended up looking like I was the person who was difficult to work with. Thanks so much for the likes and the love. I appreciate y'all. And so in that, I later found out so there were a lot of contributing things. That wasn't necessarily the biggest thing that caused me to want to exit that role. But I ended up deciding that I was going to leave. And it wasn't until I was leaving later that I found out that individual was really trying to we ended up hiring another individual. And it wasn't until that time later that I realized that individual was trying to kind of get me removed in my role in my job. So they were talking to others in the organization, my supervisor, about, how I wasn't able to do my job, how I wasn't I had tuned out. I was looking for other jobs. And then, and ultimately at the end of the day, they just didn't want to deal with me pushing back on them. And so I say all of that to say, had I not been in a situation in that moment where I already had those really good relationships, where I had a documented process about what my expectations were, how I advised employees, how the actual situation happened, I definitely could have seen myself in a much different place. And so I say all of that to say, even though I feel like there were missteps that I made in my career, don't feel like the missteps or the other things that are going wrong are going to make acceptable when other people are trying to discriminate against you. And I very much feel like even though I don't quite know whether at that time, whether it was motivated by my race, right, from me being a Black woman, but I absolutely know that it was an issue with my age, right? I was being discriminated against and treated differently by this individual because I was early career, right? And so that all of those different things kind of impact and kind of influence how we show up and how we're able to navigate the world as Black women, right? I'm fortunate. I guess, I don't know. I was raised by very strong Black women. I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to repeal myself or kind of pull back on what I knew was right in that instance. And I encourage all of you to do that. So we're going to talk about really all of these ways that you can kind of push back, because a lot of the times when we're dealing with these things, right, where we feel like we weren't quite sure what went wrong, we weren't quite sure really how this kind of fell on us, a lot of that has to deal with the egos and the manipulation and the control of other leaders who are going to essentially use our our demographics to their benefit, right? So for instance, in that case, and what I shared was my age, right? In that case, yeah, I'm sure there were other dynamics there, that being a man in leadership and just kind of thought I should just do whatever he wanted to do. I'm sure the misogyny is there. It wasn't something I was fully aware of at the time. So I can't really say I look for the cues of, are you doing this to other people or is it just me? It's just me. Uh anyway, all of that being said, like, it was a moment where I had to say, I really need to understand what this looks like long term in my career, particularly in human resources, where my ability to talk about what's going on, the dynamics with discrimination, has real implications on other employees, and what's kind of, if I'm walked over, other employees are walked over, particularly if it's a small organization and HR department. So that is what we are talking about today. How can we use these moments of identifying, hey, that wasn't fair, or hey, this was discrimination, or even retaliation, in a way that shows up for us specifically as Black women, in ways that we can tackle that, right? And so you heard in my story just now, I was pushing back. I was keeping my receipts. I was talking about expectations. I was having open and transparent conversations about what really happened versus what other people were telling me, right? And those are all part of this story of creating of shifting a narrative and being responsible for how we show up and how we're perceived, even if others aren't going to support us, even if others are kind of co-signing the discrimination, we still have the opportunity to address those things. And I ultimately think that if we're able to address them, we have better outcomes than if we are to shrink. So let's talk about it. So hey, I know I've been on a little rant. I haven't said hello to everybody, but if you're here, let me know that you're here. Just say, hey girl, hey, tell me what you're tuning in from, and let me know if you've ever had any of these types of experiences where individuals are discriminating against you based on age, gender, your role, whatever that is, right? Let your girl know what's going on. I know y'all over there on YouTube and TikTok, okay? Y'all let it loose. I know on LinkedIn, y'all a little bit more reserved, but that's okay. All right, let me take a drink of coffee, and we're going to talk about the shifts that we should notice. And I think these shifts are very much tied to whether or not this performance is actually valid. Maybe that's the right word to say it, like whether it's fair or not. So let's talk about it. Thank you so much for the gifts on TikTok. Love y'all. Okay, so, and I can't tell. Anyway, that's fine. Thank you so much for the gifts. I think they're my mom. They're from my mom. They're little puff hearts. Okay, because TikTok was playing with me and they said, you can't go live. So now I'm on desktop and we'll see how the stream goes. Hopefully it's all right. All right, so let's talk about some of the shifts that are kind of some telltale signs that you're in a place where you're being discriminated against or retaliated against, right? And particularly from our context as Black women. So the first one is really that pet to threat scenario, right? You've gone from being in a place where people praise you, you're a top performer, to somebody that needs improvement, right? And that was very much my experience that I just talked about, right? I was in a stage where I was like, I was making all the hires, I was transforming things, I was getting things done that nobody had been able to do in the past, right? A top performer. They love you when you're fixing all of their issues, but if they can't do what they want to do, they don't want to listen to Black women. We know the world doesn't want to listen to Black women, okay? So they switch it up, and then they start to, they want to still take advantage of the good skills, but they don't want to acknowledge the good skills, because then they can't have an angle that something's not right with how things are going in terms of their treatment of you, or how they want to do things, which may not always be the right thing to do, right? And we know as Black women, we're often the advocates, right? We're often standing up for what's right. We rely and act on our values, right? And so when we go into those spaces, okay, we go into those spaces and we're like, hey, this isn't what it's going to do. We talk about the right thing to do, the best practice. This isn't even like a negative thing happening, because people get threatened by us when we are operating in our gifts, our skill sets, our talents, right? And they will sit here and say, oh, you didn't do, that's not right. That's not right. Right. When it's all right, they just had an issue of how you're holding them accountable for whatever they're supposed to do or who they're supposed to be. Right. And so often when these things happen, we see the shift from us going from like a top performer to us being somebody that's quote unquote underperforming. Right. Because they're finding other things to talk about that aren't in alignment with really what we're doing really well. And that's intentional. It's a part of control, and it's a part of kind of keeping you small so that they can kind of just, have you do whatever they want, right? Or not advocate for yourself. And this happens a lot with promotions as well. They don't want to promote you. They don't want to see your value. So then they will just, they'll just kind of try and diminish you in other little ways, and also lead you to believe that you're not that good, right? Yeah. Okay. The second one is unclear standards or expectations. So I would have a supervisor that would never tell me that I didn't do something right, but there were also always different expectations, right? So if I submitted something like a piece of paperwork or project or whatever, the answer to whatever they asked me to do would suddenly change. Like, oh, we were actually supposed to be doing this, or we actually supposed to be doing this, or that's not what I said this, right? So it's not even sometimes a dig on you, but the result is that you're like, oh, okay, it's not feedback, and then you're there a year later. Sorry, it's not feedback on you, but it's still feedback that you didn't accomplish a thing because you didn't listen, right? And even if they never say that, oh, you're not a good listener, right? Then you're sitting here like a year later at your performance review, and they're like, oh, you haven't completed this. We really would expect you to do that. And then that's where that, oh, suddenly you're not performing. Suddenly that's not working out right. Like there's just a variety of different, like very manipulative ways. So a sign is that you're not getting clear expectations or standards for what you're supposed to be working on, or your duties or project, whatever that is. We're going to talk about those specific things that I talked about for like performance reviews and performance improvement plans or write-ups. Hey, hi, banana. Sorry. Hello. Welcome to the live. But what I was going to say is that like in those situations where they're trying to push you out, those performance reviews and those performance improvement plans are not going to be clear. They're going Sorry, Marche, I am in your life. I'm in your life because it's my life too. I love that for you. Sorry, I'm going to try and be a little less loud. But yeah, I'm in your life. It's my life too. We just be out here struggling as Black women. So I understand. I know. So yeah, so they don't want you to succeed. They don't want you to be able to be to be able to move past that. They want to push you out. So essentially they're going to just shift all of that in order to kind of have you not be successful so that they can make a termination or not promote you or whatever that is. Okay. Next one is always wrong, never right. And it's kind of two-sided, right? Because it's like everything that you do is not enough, right? And so I have a supervisor that I would present something to. I'd say, here's a plan, here's the strategy, and like, here's this thing. Oh, move this around, do this, just this. And again, it kind of like just keeps you on that cycle of never kind of moving forward in your career or otherwise, because you can't get anything done. That's a terrible way to be able to move forward in your career. But also at the end of the day, it is something that leads to a lack of confidence, right? Because you're like, oh, nothing's right. And if you don't realize that that's what they're doing, then, oh, we see CJ on a different account. Hey, girl. Not on TikTok too. I'm cracking up. Not you moving platforms. But anyway, so I think it's important, right? Because it undermines your skill. And so then therefore nothing that you ever do is right. And I've had supervisors that like, it would be so insane. Like I would give them a project and then they would look at it and they'd say, oh, we need to change this to this. And then I would change it. I would give it back. And they would literally tell me to change it back to what I had already done. There is no way to win that war, right? And like I said, we're going to talk about like the remedies for some of these things in just a minute, but like that is a common thing. And the other thing, so the other side of that with never right is that you're never complimented on things that you've done well, right? They can't acknowledge the good performance because then it doesn't fit whatever narrative they're trying to paint about you not being or doing enough, right? So they're not going to compliment you. So we can't expect for it. So those are those things. Like if you never receive any positive feedback, even though you know, okay, I love that. I'm going to come back to that because there's a couple of apps like this that I really need to go look at so that I can better recommend those to my audience. But yeah, so yeah, if they're not going to provide you any positive feedback. Okay, so the next one is the fall gal. So this happens when there's a lot of things going on at the organization, but the people above you, like your manager, even a higher level leader, maybe. So if you were reporting to a manager, even your director or vice president could be, I don't want to say in on that. That sounds so gross. They could be in on it. And so what will happen is that they're having issues with the project. They're not assigning things right. They're not delegating. They're not doing, and they're also not communicating to you like what you're supposed to be accomplishing. So then what happens is when somebody high up, or they finally have to meet a deliverable, so whether it's high up or external, like maybe it's customer facing, they come to you and they're like, well, why didn't you get this done? Or why wasn't this done? And they're like setting you up to be the fall person for this. And they're going to blame it on your performance when in fact, you know that they didn't give you what you needed to get the job done. Like that happens so much. And then we're sitting here like, oh, whatever, I should. Connection, 1 second. My other stuff says it's lost connection, so we'll see if it comes back. Comes back. Doop-a-doop-a-doop. All right, sorry, I'm back. Sorry if you saw the little dance break. I'm back. Okay, since I'm back, we took a little break. CJ said Cage Bird has an app called Work Receipts for Free. So I assume that it's an app, and I haven't used it, which I said I need to, but I know that there's the absolute apps out there that will allow you to document. So we're going to talk about documentation in just a minute and like what real documentation looks like, particularly for discrimination, right? And I'm going to talk through like a scenario in which that was not the case and somebody tried to bring a case. That I've only ever been on the other side of that, right? I have not done I've not gone to the EOC. I've not done litigation. So those are all of those things. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I thank you, moderator Talana. I see that. So yeah, CJ said Cage Bird has an app called Work Receipts for Free. So yes, you can use that as a place to store all of your information because you shouldn't be storing that on the location of whatever your supervisor. Store that somewhere else. Okay. All right. Just in case you got to go back at them later. Okay. Because they're wild out here. The last thing here is that a shift that you'll see is you're now being excluded from things. So for instance, if you were pushing back, if something wasn't going right, or even if like, let's say you're actually having some type of performance issue, but they don't want to help you through that. They just kind of want to push you out. They're going to start excluding you from things. They're going to stop telling you about what's going on. They're going to stop inviting you to meetings. They're going to stop telling you about new things that are going on because this idea is that you have to work to figure out what you need to fix. They're not going to fix it for you. And then, of course, that negatively impacts your performance. And then it kind of just becomes a snowball. Okay, so I'm sorry if y'all had to see that. That was a glob. Sorry. Okay, so essentially, let me do a recap. I want to know in the comments which one of these have you seen happen in your career. Also, if I did not list anything that has happened in your career, let me know. But yeah, it's time to engage. I said the clock out is for engagement, okay? You're not just sitting here listening. This is a two-way conversation. Let me know. So the first one is that you move from a top performer to someone who needs improvement. You had separate or unclear not me disconnecting. You had separate or unclear standards. You had an always wrong, never right situation. You were the fall person for something that went wrong that was above or beyond you. It's above me now. Okay. And the fifth one is that you were excluded. Now, these are not all encompassing, but I would love to learn which one is about you. Let me know in the comments. I'll wait. I want to know. We're talking about the resolutions now. You got paper. I've been in a paper mood lately. I've been writing everything on paper. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. I basically broke my printer last night. You got anything? No? Y'all are quiet today. It's okay. I know you're out there. I can see you. I see you. No, it's okay. Love y'all though. Okay. Let me know. I'm gonna do it one more time. We'll see if we see if y'all can get you to talk to me. Okay, top performer to needs improvement. Separate separate like from others or unclear standards. Always wrong, never right. The fall person and excluded. Which one y'all is? Okay, so now we're gonna talk about some of the. While I wait for y'all, I really want to know. Y'all are so quiet today, but that's okay. Okay, all. Marche said, okay, all of the above. Thank you. I appreciate you. Y'all quiet today. That's okay. Okay, so let's talk about some of the ways that you can rectify or address these things. So I think at the end of the day, what we all have to be more aware of is being strategic and aware. So if you came late, you didn't hear my story, I talked about how I didn't know that this individual was kind of politically circling around me. I always talk about my work product. I always talk about why what I do is I'm the best at what I do. But even if I didn't know that, and that was a natural default for me, I probably would have been having a much harder time talking about basically my wins, why it wasn't a performance issue, why this individual was a problem, because I wouldn't have had that like track record of what happened before that individual came. And so I say that is because we really have to be strategic, right? If somebody has an issue with us, we really have to consider that they've probably talked to others behind our back, talked to our leaders, talked to our peers, whoever, talked higher up, especially if they're a leader that we have issues with. We have to be strategic and start to counteract some of those things. It's important that we listen to our cues, right? So if this individual was upset enough to basically go complain to my supervisor that I had called them unethical, it's likely that they're probably maneuvering or advocating for something to not have to deal with me, whether that's getting me pushed out, whether that's removing the work relationship, whatever that is, getting me to receive negative performance evaluations. I have to assume that. And I think a lot of times we don't necessarily assume that, or we assume that it's happening, but we don't take steps to address it, right? And so this is about empowering you. This isn't about shrinking. This isn't just about like understanding the flags, not to do anything. We want to be able to change and shift and control the narrative to the extent that we can, right? By being strategic. So we have to start listening to what the things are, and then we have to start building evidence. So I told you in that situation that I was talking about, I understood what that individual was complaining about, but I already had my receipts of what the issue was, what I had been working on, why this should have never happened, our policies, our procedures, right? I already knew that. Now, again, that's something that's that's just really ingrained in me, but I understand not everyone thinks like that. But we ultimately have to say, what is this issue that's happening? Hey, Thandeka, what a lovely name. What is the issue that's already happening? How do we address that? How do we have evidence of that? And particularly evidence that is related to our work output or our work product, right? And so if we're in the case where we're already like communicating our work product and what we do well and like our accomplishments, this makes narratives that other people want to have around us much more challenging to have, right? So I was having a supervisor who just was threatened by me, didn't want to deal with me pushing back on that individual. And they would kind of go, I could tell by how people were interacting with me. I was a lot more savvy then. I could tell by how people were interacting with me that they were kind of sharing things about like my lack of expertise or skill set, or kind of, again, still early career navigating these spaces where kind of that was used against me, kind of thing. And so again, I had to figure out, how do I connect with the people that I need to share my work product so that you know who I am and what I do well, right? So these are all things that are connected. Absolutely. So here are some of the ways that you can kind of resist in these situations. And this is my disclaimer, right? In these situations, I know who I am. I always know that I am going to address discrimination. I'm going to address inequities, unfairness. And so I was okay dealing with whatever the fallout was for that, right? Whether this is this guy, going to make a complaint with human resources about me, I don't care, right? I mean, I care about my work relationships, but I don't care if somebody is going to label me as the angry Black woman, difficult, or whatever when I'm trying to navigate those places. Or these things, right? I also acknowledge that like I'm a light-skinned Black woman with like a very soft voice, and like I'm very bubbly and friendly naturally. And so I don't deal with a lot of the same level of the discrimination and the stereotyping that other Black women who are darker or who have maybe a more assertive existence, like in the way that they hold themselves or they speak, right? And so I acknowledge that. And so I'm saying all of that to say that I'm not saying that these things won't still be uncomfortable. I'm not saying that these things won't be a challenge. I am saying that for me and my values, I'm going to stand up for myself, because I believe that ultimately the more that we essentially put employers on notice that this is an acceptable way to treat or behave and interact with Black women, the more that we set the precedent that this is shifting for us, and you're not going to do this. Okay. That's all I got to say. So I'm not saying it's always going to be easy. I'm not even going to say that it's all going to back up. It's all going to be fine, right? Sometimes these can lead to worse outcomes, right? I'm putting that out there. Okay. So one of the things that I do is if I'm having an issue, I seek clarification, right? So a lot of times when we get this feedback, we just accept it. We just say, oh, we can't push back. We can't ask questions. We can't do this. Ask for clarification of the expectations and what they're asking of you, what they're doing, all of the above. When you do this, you are going to then receive the evidence or essentially non-evidence of what they think is going wrong. So if they give you something that's like, oh, okay, actually I could see that, then it's like, okay, well, maybe this is fair performance feedback, right? Some performance feedback is really fair, and we have to be open to that. On the other hand, a lot of it is meh. Okay, so then in that case, if it's not fair, if it's discrimination, if it's a way for them to push you out, if it's just somebody being a toxic supervisor, then you know that you have options, right? So you can document that. So we'll talk about documentation in a little bit more in just a minute, but you can document that. You can basically share, you can push back that what they've told you doesn't align with the evidence that you have. And you can also seek support from others in your organization, right? So if you know that you're on solid ground with your performance, what's been asked of you, and you know that they're not asking you to do the right thing, you can go and elevate. You can talk to human resources. You can talk to other people. And we're going to talk about how to make HR your friend in just a minute. I need to go a little bit faster because I'm not going to get through all of this, okay? But essentially, what I want you to know is that there are ways for you to resist, which means asking for clarification, getting your evidence, and essentially documenting everything. We're going to go through things in greater detail now. So this first thing is documentation. So I'll bring back up what CJ has, is that there are applications out there that will help you document what's going on. Oh, no. Yeah. It's okay. We'll see how TikTok. I don't know if TikTok. Sorry, CJ. So CJ said it's giving me some trouble. Kept spinning. So TikTok is upset with me. They revoked my live access. So I'm doing it on Live Studio. Whatever. We'll figure this out later. But TikTok, you and me, we're not friends right now. So I don't know if it was me or TikTok, but whatever. So anyway, documentation is not necessarily an aggressive, scary thing that we make it out to be, right? We're like, oh my gosh, we got to write a documentation because they're going to fire me and they're going to terminate me. Really, you should be documenting all things in your job, right? Not just when things are going bad. Documentation from the start is going to allow you for success and greater evidence when you move forward. So if you're here right now and you're actually like, oh, it's not really that bad, but I dealt with that before, document. Okay. And so in this case, right, documentation is sometimes easy, right? So if you have a conversation, right, and they're asking you about a project, they're asking you to do things, or even if they're saying that you didn't do something correctly, documentation can be as simple as an email, right? It can mean, say, oh, you call it the chaser or the clarifier, right? So you can say, we had a meeting, this is what we discussed. Can you confirm this? Can you clarify this? Da, da, da. So at the end of the day, they're either going to clarify that or you're going to have evidence that they didn't provide you what they said they were going to provide you. And then also, if you're doing that, right, and you have different, this is the part for discrimination that's important. And I'm going to talk about 2 stories when I do this. So you have to be able to provide evidence that you were treated differently than others in comparable roles or opportunities or had similar responsibilities to you, right? And so that difference is based on some type of protected class, right? So whether that's gender, race, age, well, we're in a world where it may not be sexual orientation or our gender. Okay. Anyway, we get into a lot of weird things with what we've got going on politically with that being legal or not legal. All that I'm saying is that you have protections for traits that are about you, right? And so you have to be able to say, hey, I was treated based on this thing. And so if you're not able to do that, then it's a challenge when you're actually going to get the support that you need, whether that's going to the EEOC or litigation or even opening a case with human resources, because a lot of people think HR is always going to be on the side of the employee of the employer or the boss. That's not always true. Hey, Tamara, welcome to the live. That is not always true. We do have resources where we are right now and we can tap into them, right? It doesn't mean that they're always going to do things right. But again, that documentation is something that could come up, right? If you choose to go to the EOC or you choose to litigate, whatever. Okay. So anyway, so the documentation of what's being asked, what are you doing? And so one of the things that I love doing is I love having check-in documents where all of this is noted. I have it all in email. I have it all in a folder that's accessible, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm really like aggressively holding this documentation to get back at my boss one day. Like, hopefully I never have to do that, right? I would love a boss that I never have to think about it that way, right? And I've been very blessed to have many bosses that I did it, right? Okay. But the one that I did, right, like having that documentation and really being able to go back and say, here are these really negative experiences that I had based on some, these tangible things, this evidence is going to be helpful. So like I said, you can do this for email, you can do this check-in documents, you can use Teams messages, you can use a separate app, but you want to have it in a way that it's not just something that you've kept to yourself. Like there's some external piece. So I'll tell 2 stories and hopefully they'll be quick. So I have one client, not going to name no client's name. Client was going through some mental health issues, and her organization chose to essentially use those mental health challenges that she was having to negatively impact her at work and her performance, right? So essentially, they were not work performance related, right? She was still doing all of the things that she needed to do at work. She was still supporting all of her clients. She was still interacting, showing up with meetings, but she wasn't happy. Y'all know how they like to do us as Black women, right? What does that mean? Oh, you're not smiling. Oh, you're not bubbly. That has nothing to do with my job, respectfully. Also, if I'm going through mental health challenges, respectfully has nothing to do with my job. If I'm getting done what I need to get done, it's not impacting the business. You don't need to be in my mental health issues. And so this client was having them get all up in her business, okay, and ask her for those things. And I said, I want you to email that. Thank you so much for this conversation, which we talked about how my mental health was impacting my work performance. Can you please, acknowledge that, what resources that you'll be providing me for my mental health, quote unquote, for not smiling at work, for this, right? And had that individual, not put all what happened was, but had that individual ended up saying, hey, I was discriminated against due to medical reasons, right? My mental health, okay? Then at that case, she would have had that documented, where essentially that organization put in paper that they were essentially giving her negative performance and feedback, which would have then impacted her job, right? In paper, in writing, right? And so those are the things that we can be really strategic about. Hey, Tamra. Okay. So again, I'm not saying that all of this would necessarily hold up in a court of law or whatnot, but I'm saying these are the types of things that we can think about when we're documenting things. This other story of like real world experience, I had a white man claim discrimination. And he claimed he was being untreated. There were different expectations for him. And as a result, he was let go for poor performance evaluations. And he went and he submitted, the issues to the EOC, got a lawyer, all of these other things. And full review of basically everything that had happened. It was shown that he wasn't discriminated against because there was significant documentation of what his expectations were and how those were same for other individuals of different races, ethnicities, genders, all of the above, right? And so if you look at it from like that standard, right, that kind of gives you some insight about what you would need to prove or to share about how you're being held to a different standard based on your identity, right? So those are some of the things. Okay. All right. So let's go on into pressing. I think we talked about this, but let's say you are in a situation where you've received feedback that you thought was unfair. And a lot of times, again, we shrink. We say, oh, we're not going to have that conversation. We're not ready to do that. Or, all of the above, right? I want us to actually normalize or be okay actually challenging that and having conversations. Now, challenging that and having conversations isn't always the way that we think it will be. I want to encourage a lot of us to say, hey, I'm going to look at this from an open standpoint. I'm going to say, I'm going to really look at this hard. And it doesn't mean that we have to believe it, because we're often gaslighted to believe that we should. But let's go into a conversation to really talk about it, right? Thank you for sharing, that feedback. I really took a lot of time to consider, the feedback that you provided me. I was really able to reflect on, all of the experiences and things that you were citing, and respectfully, whatever, you noticed these things, right? So maybe what they said is that you weren't following up with the client. Okay, well, here's all of this evidence of like me following up with 90 clients, right? Oh, well, I noticed you weren't doing this. Okay, well, here's all this evidence of me doing this or not doing what you said I was to do, whatever the behavior is or whatever the expectation that was set. and opening the conversation of saying like, can you please clarify or share more about, this feedback, because it's not aligning with some of the things that that I accomplished or that we've talked about in the past, right? And so then it puts the burden of the standard or the clarification of what's going wrong on in their court. Now, they're either going to do something that's going to say they're going to reflect and they're going to come back correct because they understand that you're not the one, or they're going to keep pushing or finding other things, or they're just going to continue to be not clear. And I think one of the things that's harmful is like the only way that you can kind of keep that accountable for whatever is going on is to do that documentation. But we're going to talk about exit in just a minute, because there are some there are some situations, which I know CJ was like, I know somebody is in on this. I'm not going to put her comment up here so it's on the internet. But I know my director is in on it, and I will not back down with what's going on. Yes. And so that's the thing, right? Of like pushing them, requiring them to be clear, right? Because at some point they're going to have to kind of show their hand, because if you have evidence that says contrary to whatever it is and you've documented it, that means they're going to have an issue either with their HR department or legally, if you choose to go that route. So we're going to talk about making HR your friend. That's going to be the last thing that we talk about as we close this conversation. So one of the things that's so stressful to me as a certified HR professional is that often people kind of tote this tone, right? And I feel like in a very like a way that is meant to trigger their audience or whatever. That's like, oh, HR is not your friend. HR is never going to defend you. HR this, HR that, HR that. You can't trust HR. I'm not saying this that I'm an HR apologist. I absolutely understand that there are a lot of HR departments that just ain't ish, right? Like they are not going to do what's right. They are going to attempt to protect the company at all costs. But what I want you to know is that a lot of times, even those HR professionals that we're talking about right now, they ain't ish. If you have your documentation in order, they're going to get into line, right? And on the other hand, the best of the HR professionals are really going to investigate and understand that and come with a determination that's going to lead to the best outcome, right? And so that could mean a couple of things for you, right? Maybe you're reassigned, maybe maybe that issue is addressed with your supervisor so that it protects your job, whatever that is. And so I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to that because I was like, I want to talk about a thing. I'm going to come back. So essentially, when you have an issue going on, right? Maybe you are being discriminated against by your supervisor, right? Submitting a claim to a complaint or a grievance, depending on your labor organization, right? To human resources is going to launch an investigation. You have to make sure that at that stage, you have your evidence already in place. Please don't go into those situations and then try to get your evidence later, because a lot of times they're going to talk to leaders, they're going to talk to other individuals. And if you aren't clear about how you feel like you're being discriminated against, at the very least, they aren't going to ask the right questions and they are just going to co-sign whatever the leader says. And at them caring the most, they are not going to really understand what they're looking for. And so then they won't ask the right questions, investigate. So at the end, they're just going to co-sign, and the other side, they're just not going to understand, right? Because you haven't been clear with what you're dealing with. So in an investigation, it's usually really clear. So you need to make sure that you're providing the right level of information about your experiences. Be prepared to talk about it in detail. Be prepared to bring your evidence and your documentation to those conversations, because people are going to be interviewed, it's going to be investigated, they're going to be wanting documentation, and those things are important when an organization has a pretty robust human resources team. A lot of teams have like whole dedicated departments that are there for employee relations investigations, right? Or labor relations, right? So all of that being said, like if you have this going on, don't wait until your supervisor goes to talk to HR first about the performance issue, right? Because then at that point, you've lost a little bit of your ground, and it's just going to look like you're reacting to whatever they've said versus you genuinely having a complaint, right? So the other thing about this too is that when sometimes our jobs are not protected because we didn't to do the right thing at the right time, right? So for instance, if you are in a situation where you have a disability or a learning disorder, or you have, or you're taking care of family, like it's family medical leave, and you don't have the appropriate conversations with your supervisor or human resources to submit the documentation, but you're doing those things, because you didn't have the documentation in place, the protections aren't there. So you have to take time to basically have those conversations and submit the paperwork to protect your job. This is really important because that's what I was like, do I want to say this now? But I'm going to say it right now, which is essentially that if you don't have those protections in place with your paperwork, it's harder to prove that you were retaliated against for that, right? So that's where the retaliation comes at. Like, okay, if you have medical leave, if you've requested a disability accommodation, right, and you haven't submitted that paperwork, so if then you come back and say, oh, well, they discriminated against me based on this, then you don't have really a lot of documentation to stand on because you didn't follow the right process. And I talk about that in this story that I tell often, where there was a Black woman who had who was interested in leadership, and she had gone to her supervisor and said, "Hey, should I apply to this? Like, I'm really looking for a promotion." The supervisor told her that she wasn't qualified. So then later they hired somebody who was less qualified, and then she went back and tried to have a claim to say, "Oh, well, I wasn't considered. My supervisor discriminated against me, told me that I wasn't really qualified." And then that claim got dismissed because she didn't follow the right HR process to be fairly considered. So what I'm saying here is, like, know the processes. Like, if you have something that's going on that's impacting your work for whatever reason, I'm going to encourage you to make sure that you're either formally submitting a complaint if that's what's happening, formally submitting a request if it's leave, or if it's an accommodation. All of those things. These are things that are really important to make sure that you're protecting yourself as much as you possibly can. And in those cases, what you're really doing here is making human resources your advocate, right? Because they know, because this process is going on, they can't just listen to the supervisor who wants to terminate you. They can't just, do the negative performance review, because they understand, like, this could have legal implications if they don't handle this right. And it's a great way to keep yourself safe. Okay. That was a lot. So I want to know, I'll pause. I had lots of thoughts and questions and everything else, but I always want to pause to find out if you all have any questions. I had so much to kind of go through, and I hope that these little nuggets can kind of help you in little ways to kind of fight back, right? And change the dynamic of what we really face as Black women, and ensure that we have the access to the right resources to do that. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions as we're going through. As we wrap up, I had this live stream, or sorry, a webinar that I was doing, and I was talking about this dynamic of Black women in the workplace, where we're dealing with these types of things, and we either fight, we freeze, or we flee. So fight, freeze, flee, right? So we fight what's going on in the workplace, and we deal with all of the things that we've got going on. And I feel like a lot of that is based in ego, right? We have to prove that we're enough. We have to prove that what they said was wrong. And a lot of times we're just not ever going to be able to realistically do that, because the individual on the other side is not about seeing us succeed, right? And on the other hand of that, we either flee, so we leave to another job that is like just as bad. We're just trying to get out of this just for now job, which is one of the most dangerous things that we can do as Black women, because we settle, we have lower standards for just for now jobs. And so often that's a much worse scenario. And then we freeze, which means we shrink. It's that shrinking thing where we like, oh, okay, we don't want to get into more issues. So we're not going to fight back. We're not going to talk about the challenges. We're not going to document. We're not going to defend ourselves. We're just going to like freeze where we are. We're not going to move, and we're not going to like fight anything. And so these reactions are all unproductive reactions for you to be able to move successfully in your career. So if you are here and you're like in a freeze, flee, fight, let me know in the comments, because I think it's time for you to really shift that dynamic so that you can experience something else in your career. So what I do for Black women who are in any of those stages, freeze, flight, or fight, I was mixing up, any of those stages, I want to encourage you to join me for my 90-day career coaching program. So I have a career coaching program that I work on really shifting these dynamics for Black women, right? Like, we're so used to these toxic environments, toxic bosses, and we don't know how to navigate those things. And particularly when we're in these situations, we don't know how to leave to find something better. So I would say, if you've dealt with anything that I've just listed today, you should not be in your job. You should be exiting. You should be making an exit plan. And so if that's you and you're like, I do want to experience something different in my career, I want to invite you to have a career clarity chat with me. Okay, because we're going to talk about it. Okay, we're going to talk about it one-on-one to help you figure this out, because we don't need this. Okay, so if you are on YouTube or LinkedIn, there is a link in the description box You can basically go there and sign up for a free career clarity chat. They are 15 minutes. We are going to get clear on what you've got going on in your career. We're going to get clear on next steps. I'm going to help you problem solve through a lot of the things that you feel like are holding you back. And then if you're on TikTok, y'all over there got to go to my bio, okay? Y'all got to go find me over there. And you can schedule a call using clicking in my bio. And so if this is you, like, I don't want you to continue to stay in this type of environment because ultimately it continues to pull you down. I posted a video earlier today where I talked about the very first time that I began to doubt my skills in my career. And I'm talking about the freeze, fly, or fight, because those are all stages that I went through when I was in that extremely toxic job. Okay. Like, I would go to that job, I would try and not trigger my manager. I would hope that she would just compliment me or see that something was going right. And then at the end of the day, I would go home. I would be in a depressive cocoon and trying to just hold myself together and hope for the best and hope that like tomorrow I got an interview to be able to leave, right? And those are things that are over a long period of time are really going to impact our ability to feel confident and to move forward, and particularly into a more positive work environment, right? Because the more we're normalizing this behavior and how we feel, the harder it becomes to really push back at it. And so I'm wanting to encourage you to not do that. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to move forward and seek something that's different. And so I'm going to say, protect yourself. Have the conversation, document today, but also don't be so willing to do that you feel like it's going to be a solution to an issue that you have now, right? Oops, TikTok is saying my live is going to end. Thank you, TikTok. I'm still here. So if this is you really are wanting to be in a better place in your career where you can feel valued and love what you do and not kind of feel like you're oppressed by a toxic supervisor or organization that was never going to see you. So they were never going to support you and they never wanted to see you win. I do want to encourage you to this way to schedule a career clarity chat with me on my profile or by using this QR code. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I hope that I do get the opportunity to connect and to speak with some of you all about what's going on in your career. And yeah, this is a lovely conversation. So any last questions, any last thoughts about what you've got going on? If not, I will see you for my next live stream, which I think I'm going to talk about human resources. And if you're an individual who's interested in entering human resources, what I would do if I was starting over my HR career. So yeah, because somebody slid in my DMs and they were like, I want to learn more about that. So yeah. Okay. I don't see anything. Once again, feel welcome to schedule a call with me for a career clarity chat to kind of learn more about how you can exit that toxic workplace environment with a 90-day career coaching program. Okay. I love y'all. Bye.